We've been looking at the 60 characteristics of complex trauma. Today we're coming to one that might seem very innocent, like it's no big deal. But it's a big deal for people from complex trauma. And it's the tendency to be negative and critical. So what I want to say up front is being negative and critical is both an attitude and an action. It's a mindset that people from complex trauma develop where they choose, often without realizing that they're choosing it, but they're choosing to find fault with stuff. They're choosing to look for negative. And so I want to start with just kind of giving you a definition, a better understanding of what I am talking about. Here's a definition. It's a common but very dangerous headspace for those with CPTSD or complex trauma. They are marked by an overall discontent and find fault with just about everything. So let me give you some examples of how this would work out in people's life. So somebody with a kind of a negative orientation, a negative critical headspace, is somebody that tends to complain a lot. And they might do it in joking ways, sarcastic ways, but there's a complaining is a common thing. Or they blame others a lot for their problems, for their discontent. When they meet people, they look for a flaw. And so they are very commonly known for criticizing people, pointing out their flaws. Many will have a victim mentality. So it's, oh, my life is awful, poor me, and just dwell on all of the negatives in their life. Others, when they're in a situation that's new or different, or they feel uncomfortable, they jump to the worst case scenario. And they go to, this is all terrible, and it's a very negative thing. Others dwell on bad news. All the time, they just focus on all the bad news in the media, social media, from reports from friends, etc. Think of a person who's in a hurry, okay? And nobody is cooperating. So you are driving somewhere, and you're in a hurry to get there, but nobody is making that easy for you. So what do you do as you're driving? Everybody else on the road is an idiot. Everybody else is stupid. And you just criticize everything. You criticize the city because the traffic lights aren't timed properly. Negative, negative, negative. And then sometimes if you picture yourself where you're tired, exhausted, and you just want a bigger bubble tonight. You don't want people coming into your bubble wanting to connect. So what happens when your spouse wants to connect? Your children want to spend time with you. Somebody just needs to talk to you. You tend to find fault with them. You tend to think they're just selfish, they're not considerate of my needs, and you become very negative. So before we look at the complex trauma connection to this, why people from complex trauma have this negative orientation, let me first make a distinction between healthy negative and unhealthy negative. Healthy critical and unhealthy critical. So healthy critical is what we would call discernment. And discernment is what we train our children to do. So don't trust people just because they're nice. See past the niceness to the truth about the person. Pay attention to red flags. Pay attention to your gut. And so what we are wanting people to do is see the other person accurately, to know whether they're safe or unsafe, healthy or unhealthy. And so discernment is not being fooled by the external, it's seeing past that to an accurate picture of the person. Unhealthy critical is finding faults with others, not for healthy reasons, but for very unhealthy reasons. So this is not just about being critical. This is why I'm critical. It can be for a good purpose to stay safe, or it can have very unhealthy purposes. So I want to give you 22 reasons why people from complex trauma often become negative and critical. So what I want you to see is it's just not one or two things. This being negative and critical meets many needs with people who are in danger. And so it becomes part of their life in many different ways. And so to understand that is really important in beginning to identify the reasons why you are often negative and critical. And again, I want to point out that for many people from complex trauma, this is a default setting. This is where they go to subconsciously, don't even realize they're doing it. It happens in their subconscious mind and periodically comes to their conscious mind. So the first thing to understand about complex trauma is that you're in constant danger. You cannot resolve the dangerous situations. You can't get to a place of safety. And so what the brain is doing is saying, I gotta find a way to protect this child. So what can I do to keep this child safe? Number one, I will look for danger in every situation I enter. So now I will train that person to look for potential problems, to look for potential harm. I am not wanting that person to see the situation from an objective point of view. They need to go in and immediately look for danger. So the brain is trained to look for negative. But then if they still are getting hurt all the time, the brain has to take it up a notch. And what it then does is say, okay, I can't just look for obvious danger. I have to look for potential danger and then jump to the worst case scenario. So potential danger, it might be dangerous, it might not, but I am going to choose that it is dangerous. So I will jump to, this is bad. Even if it's an uncomfortable feeling, I will jump to a worst case scenario. So it is an essential survival tool for a child in constant danger to begin looking for negative, to train themselves to be negative. But then let's bring it to the shame. So when a child is in constant danger, often it's because they're abused, they're neglected, they're abandoned, their needs, emotional needs aren't being met. And so they think it's their fault. So I must be doing something wrong. I must be bad. I must not be lovable. I must not be valuable. That's why I'm being abused and neglected. That creates a core identity of shame. That belief that I'm not good enough. So what happens with shame? It develops this inner critic in your brain that no matter what you do, you go, not good enough, not good enough, negative, critical. If others pay you compliments, the inner critic says they don't know the real you. If they did, they wouldn't say that. And negative. Negative is the voice in your head. But then the child doesn't want to feel not good enough, not valuable. So the brain is looking for ways to create a sense of I have value. And one of the things that the brain does is say, let's find fault with everybody else. Because if I can put everybody else down, that'll make me feel better about myself. And so now, being critical meets the need of not feeling good enough because I put everybody else down. Then, for many people to feel value, their brain goes to, if I am perfect, then people will love me and respect me. That's what will give me value. That will fix my shame. So, they try to be perfect. But what happens? Nobody can be perfect. So, instead of improving their shame, improving their sense of not having enough value, trying to be perfect actually reinforces it and creates a greater negative critic, because now you focus on every time you fail to be perfect. And that becomes your obsession. And you make that a constant thing in your mind. Another purpose that this being negative fills is the child who's neglected, abused, and abandoned has many needs that aren't being met. But they have learned that if you go and ask people to meet those needs, it's likely they're not going to. They're going to reject you, or they're going to punish you. They're going to call you selfish. So the only way to get your needs met is you can only trust yourself, so you have to manipulate. And so one of the tools for manipulating is when I meet a person, I want to find out something really bad about them that I can use as leverage against them. That I can threaten them, that I will expose this area of their life unless they do what I want. And so now I am looking for flaws in people. I am looking for the dirt on people, more negative. Then for people who remain in a victim mentality, where they go to a place where they go, I don't want to choose to change. I just want people to feel sorry for me. And so what happens in that person's mind, in order to reinforce this victim mentality and getting others to feel sorry for them, they have to blame everybody, everything for their problems. They never take ownership for their problems. It's always somebody else's fault. And that's another type of negative orientation. One of the things with complex trauma is a tremendous fear of failure. And so what happens for a lot of people when they go to start something new is this fear that they might fail rises up inside of them. And so they want to quit. They don't even want to give it a try, a fair try, because they're pretty sure they'll fail. That's what shame has told them. And so how do you get an excuse to quit? Well, you find something wrong with this new project, with this new endeavor. And if I can find enough wrong things about it, enough negative things, then I have an excuse to quit or to not even start. Take that a little bit further. For some, that then goes to the need to change in their life. And so what I find with people that come to react, and they begin to realize there's not an easy fix to trauma. I'm going to have to deal with some very old wounds that are going to be painful. I am going to have to use new tools that are going to be very challenging. I'm not willing to do that. Okay, so how do I get out of changing? Well, let's criticize React. Let's criticize all the teachers of React. Let's criticize the way they teach their content. Let's find something negative to justify me not changing. Another very subconscious thing that happens for people is if you are from complex trauma, there's a good chance your parents also have complex trauma. And you're just the next generation that's affected. So if your parents have complex trauma, there's a good chance that they have a negative critical orientation. And you probably grew up with parents going to a social event and then afterwards just criticizing, pointing out all the flaws in different people, gossiping all the dirt about people. You grew up in an environment where your parents were always pointing out your flaws and not encouraging you and validating you in good ways. And so as you grew up in that, without realizing it, you got those tapes in your head. So now when you go into any situation, you just hear your parents' voices in your head, and they become your voices. So they trained you as well to have a negative orientation. Another thing that I find with many people I deal with is to notice what they get especially negative about. And often what they get negative and critical about when they meet somebody or watch somebody, the thing that bothers them the most about that person is usually the thing they like the least in themselves. It's the part of them that God made fun of, the part of them that they hated, wished that wasn't them. Now, when they see that in somebody else, it triggers an immediate negative, critical response to that person. But really, they're just projecting their own issues onto that person. Another way that many people from complex trauma try to solve their shame is they can't have a bigger house, they can't have more money than others, they can't compete in the looks arena, they can't compete in the sports arena and be better than others in any of those arenas. So what they do is they go to the moral arena, the religious arena. And so now my self-righteousness, I am more righteous than you. But how do I keep my sense of being more righteous than you? I point out all the ways you're not righteous. I focus on your moral flaws. So it's necessary to feed a self-righteous attitude. Another thing that happens in complex trauma is that parents can have unrealistic expectations of their children. So they can say to your child, you should have known I wanted that. In other words, to the child, you should be a mind reader. Or you should not be a child in the sense of being busy, being active, making noise, playing. You should be just quiet, seen, not heard. And so that unrealistic expectation caused parents to constantly be criticizing the child. And so now they can do that in their adult life today. They can have unrealistic expectations of others, their spouse, their children, their friends. And if those people don't meet those unrealistic expectations, and they can't, then they find negative criticism about those people. Another thing that some parents in complex trauma wanted to do is they wanted to have their children look only to them. They wanted to be the greatest influence, have the greatest power in their child's life. So they wanted to create this extra loyalty to them, to the family. And one of the things that they often did is they then had to destroy everybody else so that the children would not look to anybody else for guidance, for friendship, just to talk about things. So they found fault with every friend the child brought home. They found fault with every family that the child was attracted to, just to try to create that loyalty. And sadly, within many complex trauma families, they develop a solution to their shame as being racism. Because I'm white, we're better than black people. We're better than indigenous people. And so they put that into their children to say, we're better than them. And now you find fault with black people, with indigenous people, in order to try to feel better about yourself. Many in complex trauma had dads who were very angry. Anger was a huge issue. But what did dad do to justify his anger? He found fault with everything. So it's not my fault I'm angry, it's that. All of that crap. That's the justification for my anger. Then I've seen something else that people do. They know in recovery that they need to develop some healthy friendships, to build a new support system with fairly safe, healthy people. But that's a scary thing, because the fear of rejection and abandonment is so deeply ingrained. And so what many people do when they start to get to know somebody and they go, I like this person, I should develop a friendship with them, fear kicks in. And so what then does fear do is, I can't go there. That's too risky. So how do I justify not developing a friendship with this person? I look for faults in that person. I look for all their flaws. to justify not developing a friendship with them. Another purpose for being negative and critical is to justify your own flaws and your own not changing. So if somebody says, you are always inconsiderate or disrespectful, you might respond by saying, at least I'm not as bad as them or them or them. So because they're worse than me, then that means I'm okay. I don't have to change. Sad that it happens so much, but it does. Then, one of the extreme responses to extreme shame is narcissism. Thinking I'm better than everybody, smarter, that everybody looks up to me, everybody thinks I'm a genius. And so what can happen in a narcissist is they need to create the image and maintain the image of being better than everybody, smarter than everybody. And so what they will do to do that is criticize stuff. Another thing that can happen, and where this critical negative mindset plays a role, is wanting everybody to agree with you. And feeling that if they don't agree with you, they're saying that you're stupid. They're saying that you're not good enough. It triggers your shame. And so what a lot of people can do when somebody doesn't agree with them is, well, before you say I'm stupid, I'm going to say you're stupid. And I'm going to criticize you. I'm going to put you down. And it's their way of responding to people not agreeing with them. Another thing that people do is if somebody comes and says, you need to change what you're doing as a parent in how you respond to your kids in this area, because you're doing a lot of damage. Well, you don't like that message. It exposes you, and you don't want to look at that area of your life. But you can't discount the message. So what do? You discount the messenger. Well, you're a jerk. You don't know what you're talking about. Look at your kids. They're not perfect. So if I can discount the messenger, then I don't have to listen to their message. And then the final one. People with a lot of shame, complex trauma, who don't feel good about themselves, can easily resent when others who are also on the recovery journey succeed, get promoted, get asked to do a job that they weren't asked to do. And so now their way of resenting the success of others is to tear that person down. So 22 purposes that being negative and critical filled in the lives of people from complex trauma. How did you do? How many of those have you used in your life, often without realizing why you do it or seeing how often you do it? And I hope you see just how big of an issue it can be. But that takes us to the next thing. Because being negative and critical operates as a default setting for most from complex trauma, they're often in that state or that mindset, totally unaware that they're there. And so it can do a lot of stuff in their brain without them even noticing that they've gone to that negative place.